Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast, and it's time to talk about Tony DeAngelo. He is up 7% overnight in ownership on Yahoo. He got a goal and assist last night on a 2-game point streak, and lots of questions coming in on whether or not he's the real deal and whether people should pick him up. Surprisingly, he's actually at 16% owned, which is higher than Sami Vatanen, which I was shocked by. I did not expect Tony DeAngelo to have more ownership than Sami Vatanen at this point in the season. Now, I want to preface all of this talk on Tony DeAngelo. One thing to keep in mind, I try to always give you this high-level thing to think about at the top of your brain while we're going through all the stats. The one thing to think about with Tony DeAngelo is that the line blender in New York is real. You never really know what's going to happen game to game. And so with Tony DeAngelo and almost any Ranger pickup, the big issue is always where are they going to be next game, because it's not predictable at the moment. We have no idea what's going on. And so that's the big picture thing to think about with Tony DeAngelo. Now, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for future Hot Hands videos and Bust Watches so you get them before anybody else. Let's see where exactly Tony DeAngelo is playing on this line blender of the Rangers. So he's playing on the second pairing here with Brady Shea. A fine second pairing, not great. As we'll see, they're actually a really bad pairing from an analytics standpoint. They're not very good at controlling shot share. And then on the power play, he's listed as first power play unit. So this was posted November 7th. So up to date for the most part, he's apparently top power play. But as we'll see, and this is similar to guys like Nate Schmidt and other players who tend to become hot hands like this, especially on defense, is they'll show up on top power play on these lineup sites, but if you actually dig into their numbers, they're not actually top power play. So if we look at the last 3 games, this is on Frozen Tools from Dauber. If we look at the last 3 games, you can see that Tony DeAngelo on even strength has been paired with Brady Shea, as we expected, about 23% frequency in a game. So he's actually kind of like a 1A, 1B top pairing in a way at even strength. But they're way worse from a Corsi perspective than Trouba and Hadjic. Not by a lot. They're not that much worse, but they are worse. And that's important because that could limit his 5-on-5 time, especially when you look at Adam Fox and Lindgren, who's getting better Corsi for than Brady Shea and Tony DeAngelo are. Now, on the power play, over the last 3 games, remember this is the last 3 games, Tony DeAngelo has gotten the most power play time. So he is the top power play defenseman at the moment, with Adam Fox being second, and then the third most common pairing is Adam Fox and Jacob Trouba. Now, that's the last 3 games, right? But if we look at this last game, where Tony DeAngelo got a goal and an assist, he actually wasn't top power play. He moved down to that pairing where Adam Fox was, and Tony DeAngelo was paired with Jacob Trouba, and that was 30% of the time in the last game, and 69%, 70% of the time last game was actually Adam Fox on the top power play. So that all changed. The actual frequency of even strength was the same, but Tony DeAngelo and Brady Shea was awful last game. I mean, terrible at 5-on-5, and he got a goal and assist. So again, he was a terrible pairing for the Rangers and got outshot more often than not in that game. Oh, and for whatever reason, I'm getting spam. Why am I getting spam on your site? That definitely should not be happening. This is why people use ad blockers. So when you look at just the usage of Tony DeAngelo, that's the one thing that stands out to me is the fact that 1, he's got very bad Corsi. 2, Adam Fox kind of took over that top power play. So it makes sense that I think that Adam Fox can start to creep into those 5-on-5 minutes as well. And as we'll see in a second, Tony DeAngelo's minutes aren't actually that great. Even though he's getting good deployment, right? He's second pairing. He was top power play for the last 3 games. From a percentage standpoint, he should be getting good minutes, right? But he's not really. So let's jump into our in-season tool here and take a look at Tony DeAngelo. Now, here are 19-20 season, last 7 days, last 30 days, and then last year's numbers. Let's focus just on the 19-20 season for now, and then we'll talk a little bit about the last 7 days. So in 1920 season, Tony DeAngelo has 11 points in 13 games, good for a 69-point pace. Nice. And his expected goals for right now are just 2. So he's expected, from where his shots are coming, shot quality and all of that, he's expected to have 2 goals, and he has 5 so far. He did score 1 last night, so that brought him up from 4, and his shooting percentage at the moment is 17.24%. That is extremely high for a defenseman. Last year, he shot at only 3.6% by the end of the season. His highest shooting percentage ever was his first season with Arizona, where he shot at around 8%. So let's assume, okay, he can get to an 8% shooter. let's assume that for a second that's what he is. That is just about 2 goals. Yeah, at 2 goals, he's a 7% shooter. At 3 goals, he's an 11% shooter, right? So his expected goals are actually just about where he should be as a shooter if he were to get up to his career highs, right? Or somewhere in the middle between what he's been on the Rangers, which is around a 3-4% shooter, and a 8% shooter that he was in his first year with Arizona. If you put it somewhere in the middle, he's like a 7%, and that's 2 goals, which is what he's expected to shoot at. That's exactly what he's expected to be at. And last year, actually, his expected goals were 4.7. Right? So around 8 goals, let's say, was his expected goals for last year. If we, let's say, round up that to 5 for him, he gets up to 4.5% shooting. So 5% shooter. So I would assume that Tony DeAngelo, to me, is a 5 to 7% shooter. Somewhere in there. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, and that's where he's at. So right now, he's shooting at 17%. I would expect the rest of season to finish at that 6 to 7%. That's what I think, especially if he continues to get this deployment, and not so much just getting this deployment, but the fact that the Rangers are such a line blender. That means that for certain stretches of games, Tony DeAngelo may get more minutes, may get more power play time. You don't really know what's going to happen, and so let's give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he gets that weird deployment every once in a while and can shoot higher. Still, I think his higher shooting percentage is at around 7 to 8% max, but I'd say it's safer to assume he's a 6 to 7% shooter, somewhere in there. So right now, he should be at 2 goals, is at 5, right? And his shot pace at the moment is 183, up around 23% from last year. Now, if you were to take that shooting percentage and multiply that by his shots pace right now, you're looking at around 11 goals by the end of the season. That's what his shooting percentage would dictate. 4 goals. You're looking at an 11 goal guy. Last year he scored 4, so that's a big improvement. That's a huge improvement for him. That's awesome. That's good for Tony DeAngelo. That's really good. But still, I think you're looking at mostly a 40-ish point guy, 45-point guy. Last year he was on a 40-point pace, only played 61 games. I think that's still kind of who he is. And then if we take a look at one step deeper here, let's look at his on-ice shooting percentage. Not that different from last year, actually. It's at 11.5%. Last year he was at a 10.6% on-ice shooting. So how often do players convert goals while he's on the ice? Last year 10.6. This year 11.5. Fine. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. They did add Panarin, and so they do have he has better line mates, let's say, right? So maybe that on-ice shooting percentage for him goes up. And on top of that, he's also playing more power play time than last year, which is good. Not from a power play percentage perspective. Last year, he played 42% on the power play. This year, he's playing 40% of the power play time. So but actual time on ice on the power play has gone up. Last year, he played around 2 minutes per game on the power play. This year, he's playing about 2.5. Over the last 7 days, he actually played almost 4 minutes of average power play time on ice. So power play time in general has gone up, but the actual percentage of the team has not gone up. So that's an important thing there. The thing that is too high here for Tony DeAngelo is his IPP. He's currently sitting at 73.3. Last year, he finished at around 42.3. Now, before people say, well, but he's playing with better line mates, he should be getting higher IPP, he should be factoring in. That's not really how this works. That IPP is very, very high. You don't see that from a defenseman. You're not going to see a defenseman normally finish in like the 73s. That's a forward number. And so that's very high, and he's going to start to factor in on less goals than normal. And part of that may have to do with Mika Zibanejad being out. And because Mika Zibanejad is out, he may be factoring in less. And the large reason for that, too, is that he does get secondary assists at a pretty high rate. Last year, 62% of his assists were secondary. Right now, he's sitting at 83%. Fine. A little bit high, but I think that could shift, right? It's not that big of a difference. We're looking at maybe a difference of 1 assist, right? 1 more primary, that's back to normal. So for Tony DeAngelo, that IPP being so high is ridiculous. And before people say like, oh no, but he can do that because of his line mates, let's take a look really quick at, for example, a John Carlson, right? Let's pull up John Carlson here and take a look at what his IPP was last year. John Carlson's IPP last year finished at 45%. Almost the same as Tony DeAngelo, a little bit higher. Or let's go to maybe Brent Burns, right? One of the best offensive defensemen in the league. He finished at 58%. So this 73% is not going to stay. It's not going to continue to happen. And that's the thing with Tony DeAngelo. When you look at it, he's currently on a 69-point pace with an extremely high IPP and shooting percentage, bring all that down, and honestly, you're looking at a player that's pretty similar to last year, and you should see an increase in points. So potentially we could see 50 points from Tony DeAngelo, maybe. But I think 50 is his ceiling, and more likely than not, I'd bet on Tony DeAngelo being a 40 to 45 point defenseman with not great peripherals, not great shots, not great hits, blocks, pims, that sort of thing. So you're looking at a good points defenseman, most likely. But again, a lot of that also depends on his deployment. Once Zibanejad comes back, I would guess that there's going to be less room on that top power play. It could go to Adam Fox or Jacob Trouba. I don't think Tony DeAngelo is the one to win it. And then one other thing I wanted to look at really quick also was actual kind of shot quality. So if we look at Tony DeAngelo's shot locations at 5-on-5 and 5v4 for this year, they're actually not that different from last year's shot locations. So his actual shooting locations haven't gotten better. They're actually pretty much the same. So he's just getting luckier and converting those shots more often than he did last year. That's pretty much all that's happening. It's virtually luck. It's not like he's shooting more backdoor or anything like that. It's pretty much the same. And then if you look at his threat levels or the threat levels of the team while he's on the ice, the team is much better with him on the ice offensively. He's a plus 8% threat level compared to a league average when he's on the ice. When he's not on the ice, they're a minus 12% at 5-on-5 than league average. So they're way worse when he's not on the ice on offense. And he is a good offensive driver. If you look at the expected goals for of the team while he's on the ice, he is one of the better players for the Rangers this season, which bodes well for him. The problem is when you look at defense, they are so much worse defensively because of him and when he's on the ice. Both. Isolated impact-wise, he makes the Rangers worse defensively, but the Rangers are also just collectively worse while he's on the ice. Plus 30% on defense, bad, versus plus 2% when he's not on the ice. And honestly, on the power play, when you look at where power play shots come from, it's questionable whether he makes the Rangers better on the power play. I'd argue he doesn't, but he does generate a lot of offense 5-on-5, and he hasn't gotten much top power play time with Panarin. So I'm going to let that sit and say maybe he does, but he hasn't had enough time on that top power play to really say he does or does not make the Rangers better on that top power play from a stats perspective, right? From the eye test, he does, I think. I think he makes them better on the power play, but I would argue Adam Fox makes them better on the power play than Tony DeAngelo does, and he deserves that top power play spot more than he does. And then there's Jacob Trouba, who I think at some point, they're paying him way too much money. He's got to make his way back up to that top power play at some point, in my opinion. So when you take that all into account with Tony DeAngelo, again, just another little thing to show you that he's terrible on defense and great on offense. When you take that all into account with Tony DeAngelo, it's a lot, I know. But to me, he's a 40-point defenseman, 45-point defenseman who's going to be streaky, I think. I think that that's the big takeaway from Tony DeAngelo is he's a streaky player. And that's not so much because he himself is not good. He is good, and he makes the Rangers better offensively. The problem is the line blender in New York. You can't predict where he's going to be game to game. And because you can't predict where he's going to be game to game, there's going to be stretches where he probably ends up on the third pairing with no power play time, which means very little opportunity of points. His ice time is actually down from last year, which isn't good. So all in all, I'd say he's a good streamer to have when he is in a good situation. Say you have, I don't know, Charlie McAvoy, for example. I'd rather have Tony DeAngelo when he's hot and getting good deployment than Charlie McAvoy at the moment. And that's how I'd use him. I'd use him as a streaming spot, but I wouldn't hold when, let's say, he loses top power play or when he's third pairing and not getting many minutes. That's how I'd use Tony DeAngelo. I wouldn't make any crazy drops. For example, today, Jacob Trouba was dropped for Tony DeAngelo in one of my leagues. I would not do that simply because if you're looking at rest of season terms, I'd much rather trust a Jacob Trouba than a Tony DeAngelo. On top of that, I'd much rather have a Sami Vatanen than a Jacob Trouba at the moment because Sami Vatanen's spot on that top power play is much more secure than Tony DeAngelo's is. As proven by last game, it was Adam Fox, not Tony DeAngelo. So I wouldn't go crazy trying to add him. Even in a points-only league, I wouldn't go too insane. But if you have, let's say, 5 or 6 defensemen rostered, he's probably a great 5th or 6th defenseman to roster at the moment, especially in a points-only sort of league. But so all in all, streamer option, use him as needed. Don't be afraid to drop once it gets down to it. Really pay attention to his deployment more than anything, and don't pay attention to daily faceoffs deployment. Pay attention to like frozen tools and places that are actually putting out the percentage of time that a player plays on the power play. Because for the Rangers, who are in such a line blender, that's really important. More so than what they're doing in practice is what they're doing in games, because David Quinn changes a lot of things in game and right before games, apparently. So you need to know exactly what's happening. So there you go. That's the hot hands on Tony DeAngelo. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know who else you'd like to hear about and ask any questions down below, and I'll catch you next time.